Hello YouTube. Today I'll tell you about one of the most interesting UFO and UFO aerial battles observations from antiquity. And it took place in the 10th century when a man by the name of Ahmad bin Ibn Fadlan, who was an Arab chronicler, was a part of a special embassy sent by Caliph of Baghdad to what was known as the land of the Volga Bulgars, located in the middle Volga River. Ibn Fadlan wrote an account of his journeys with the embassy. The account is properly termed Risaleh. Well, Risaleh contained detailed description of the peoples that lived in the area, the Russians or Rus, Bulgars, Hazars, and others. Ibn Fadlan operated under the protection of military commander Muhammad ibn Suleiman al-Katiba, who conquered Egypt in 905 for the Baghdad Caliph. Ibn Fadlan was a secretary, and he was a keen observer of the territories where the embassy traveled. The Bulgars, a nomadic tribe, settled in the northern Volga-Kama River region, which became known as Magna Bulgaria, after the death of their great leader Kubrat. A leader of the Bulgars at the time, a Muslim, wanted to relinquish control of the Khazar kingdom over his land, and he asked the Caliph to send Muslim teachers, mosque builders, and he also wanted a military castle to be built for his needs. So in response to his embassy to Baghdad, the Caliph sent his own embassy headed by Susan Arasi, which left Baghdad in June of 921, or in the months of Safar of the year 309 of the Hijrah. That embassy returned to Baghdad in the spring of 923. This was a political mission, and besides strengthening Islam in Eastern European countries, the Caliph wanted to increase his presence in the region and get trade privileges. The embassy traveled outside of the Hazar lands through Central Asia to be safe. Eventually, in 922, the embassy embarked to the shores of the Volga River, and they traveled on land. A number of functionaries left the embassy because they were afraid to enter the land of the Aghuz people. And Ibn Fadlan now basically headed the whole embassy. Well, they were lucky to leave the land of the Aghuz people alive, and so they traveled on to their main destination. The Arab chronicler visited the ruler of the Volga Bulgar people in 922 Common Era. The very first night spent in the palace of the king, Ibn Fadlan witnessed a very strange celestial phenomenon. Just before the sunset, the horizon became bright red, and from somewhere above came a low rumble. Ibn Fadlan raised his eyes to the sky and saw a fiery reddish cloud moving above him. At the same time, another cloud appeared, similar to the first one. The Arabs were frightened and kneeled in prayer. The locals, however, were amused by their guest's behavior and laughed out loud. As they later explained to Ibn Fadlan, such battles in the sky take place every night. Ibn Fadlan and his companions looked up in the sky and observed how one cloud joined itself with another, and how some time later the clouds came apart again. The clouds disappeared when the night fell. The chronicler described constantly moving shapes inside the clouds, human and animal-looking shapes. Ibn Fadlan saw weapons in the arms of the beings within the clouds. The shapes were quite clear one moment and would disappear the next moment. The battle he observed consisted of one formation, black formation, attacking the other formation. That battle lasted for a long time, At one point, the formations merged together and then separated once more. Ibn Fadlan mentions that he could observe the phenomenon quite clearly. Finally, the phenomenon disappeared. Ibn Fadlan emphasized the loud noises, sounds, and visibility of the occurrence. The Bulgars explained those riders in the sky as jinni. In Muslim legends, a supernatural being who can take human or animal form and influence human affairs. It was like the faithful ones were fighting against the unfaithful, according to the locals. Ibn Fadlan was a very diligent person and a great chronicler. When the embassy returned to Baghdad, Ahmad ibn Fadlan put together his writings into the Risaleh, and it became one of the most important sources of information about medieval Volga lands and Central Asia. The final section of the Risaleh was lost, but we know that Ibn Fadlan did return to Baghdad. For example, it was confirmed by Shihabuddin Abu Abdullah Yaqut ibn Abdullah al-Hamawi, a well-known Muslim scientist, author, philologist, traveler, historian, and geographer of the 12th century. Ibn Fadlan's Risaleh contains fascinating description of the people in the lands where the embassy traveled, and it was not a very flattering one about the Rus or the Russian customs. We really do not know much more about the life of Ahmed ibn Fadlan, ibn al-Abbas, ibn Rashid, ibn Hamad. That's too bad, because he was an interesting person and a keen observer, and encountered dangers and adventures in his travels. If you recall, years ago, a motion picture starring Antonio Banderas was released, and it was titled 13th Warrior. It was based on Ibn Fadlan life, but as often the case, the movie had nothing to do with the real life of Ibn Fadlan. He, this chronicler, did describe everything that he saw with his own eyes from the time of his departure from Baghdad and the time when he returned to Baghdad. And we're not sure what really happened to him afterwards, because the mission was not that successful, but it gave us knowledge of some of the most interesting UFO observations in a faraway land for most of you, and a long time ago. I have another observation that I'll talk about, which took place in the 18th century, and a very similar battle took place over St. Petersburg, and it was recorded by a Dutch diplomat at the time and also Russian naval commander. But that's for another time. I do want to tell you that if you consider that 1,000 years after the events that Ibn Fadlan recorded in the year of 1990 now, in April of 1990, a Russian woman observed a UFO over the Tian Shan Mountains, which is in Soviet Central Asia at that time. The object was iridescent and it broke in several parts, and then the parts would come together again into a single entity. I will tell you more stories in the future. Please subscribe to my channel and please share this video. Thank you.